The quarantine alarm blared through the metallic halls of the Virellan Research Station, red lights pulsing across the ceiling as personnel scrambled into sealed sectors. Dr. Silex, a tall, four-limbed scientist with gray translucent skin, stood at the decontamination gate, his elongated eyes fixed on the readouts of the infected chamber. "It's mutating again," he said aloud, his translator unit chirping with each syllable. "Strain Delta 7 has breached filtration protocol." Inside the quarantine chamber, two Virellan medics moved slowly, both encased in Level 5 hazmat suits. The figure on the cot inside the chamber was nearly unrecognizable bloated skin, lesions along the neck, coughing violently into a sterile cloth. "Name?" one of the medics asked through the intercom. "Commander Yeltok," Silex replied. "He returned from the Gornik system 2 days ago." Symptoms began within 12 hours. Airborne transmission confirmed. A third figure approached the glass shorter, clearly human, wearing a standard Earth-issued quarantine suit. He paused before entering the antechamber. His name tag read, Dr. Stephen Jackson. "Is this the Virellan virus you mentioned during the summit?" Stephen asked, voice steady but tired. "The one you said was incurable?" "Yes," Silex said. "We have lost 43 personnel across 3 stations. No known treatment." "The virus adapts faster than any nanotherapy we deploy." Stephen adjusted his respirator. "And you said it doesn't affect humans?" "Not yet," Silex replied. "You are genetically incompatible. The virus does not recognize human cells as viable hosts." For now, Stephen looked over the commander's vitals. 43 lost. How long from exposure to death? "Less than 2 days, Silex said. "Some quicker. All show identical progression: fever spike, neural inflammation, respiratory failure." Stephen backed away from the glass. "I brought something. It's not a cure, not yet, but I've seen viruses collapse under similar treatments back home." "You cannot simply guess," Silex said, eyes narrowing. "This virus is not bound by your Earth logic." Stephen pulled a small vial from his medkit, holding it up. "This is not a guess. It's a broad-spectrum antiviral we use for hemorrhagic fevers. Not perfect, but it slows replication rates. I want to try it on one of your infected under full observation." Silex hesitated. "We do not test on the dying. It is considered dishonorable." "Then keep letting them die," Stephen said. "I'm not here to be right. I'm here because I'm still breathing and your people aren't. Let me help." Silence. Then Silex turned to the medic. "Prepare a secondary chamber. Begin Phase 1 human-monitored trial." Hours later, Stephen stood in another quarantine room, this one built for cross-species medical observation. A younger Virellan lay on the table across from him, trembling under a thermal blanket. A single Roman 4 line ran from the human side of the chamber, through a double-sealed transfer tube and into the alien's vessel. Stephen watched the vitals. Fever, 109.2. Heart rate erratic. Vitals climbing, the Virellan nurse on the transmitter noted. "No response yet." "I know," Stephen said. "It's not instant. Just give it time." Silex entered the observation room, arms crossed. "You look exhausted." "I've been up for 19 hours, Stephen said. "But I'm not leaving until I see what this does." 3 hours passed. The fever dropped by 2 degrees. The heart rate steadied. "Response noted," the nurse said, almost surprised. Silex leaned toward the screen. "How is this possible?" "It's not magic," Stephen said. "It's chemistry. You said your treatments use nanotech. This drug tricks the virus into binding with inert proteins instead of healthy cells. It doesn't kill the virus, it just makes it think it's already infected everything." Silex looked at the human. "You did not even wear reinforced armor, only a fabric suit." "I'm not immune," Stephen said, "but I'm careful and I don't touch my face." An alarm went off suddenly. Stephen jumped. "New case incoming," a voice crackled. "Civilian transport ship docked minutes ago. 2 infected." Silex turned sharply. "We are out of chambers." Stephen stood. "Then give me a mask and a fresh Roman 4 line. If I don't move now, you'll lose them both." "You are a single human," Silex said. "You cannot hold the line alone." I'm not holding anything, Stephen said. I'm just trying to keep someone else from dying today. 30 minutes later, Stephen was injecting the antiviral into another Virellan patient. This one was older, already unconscious. His hands trembled slightly as he fixed the tubing. "You're sweating," the nurse said through the intercom. "I know," Stephen muttered. "I'm not used to working in 70% humidity." Silex appeared on the screen again. "You are risking exposure." "I know that too." The second patient's vitals began to stabilize. Silex stared at the readouts. "This is not possible. You are using a human drug on an alien virus." "I told you it's not a cure, but it's something." Stephen leaned back against the wall, breathing hard. "And I'm not leaving until we find out how far it can go." Silex said nothing. Stephen wiped the sweat from his brow. Outside, another alarm sounded, more infected arriving. 4 hours after the second patient received the antiviral, the medical wing of Virellan Research Station had descended into a rhythmless chaos. Not the kind driven by panic, but the kind where the rules no longer worked. Systems that once followed rigid protocols now bent at odd angles, reshaped by the arrival of a single anomaly. A human who wouldn't wait for permission to try. Dr. Stephen Jackson paced the narrow walkway between isolation modules, his boots tapping softly against the reinforced polymer floor. His face was pale beneath the helmet visor, not from fear, but from 40 sleepless hours and the dull ache of mounting dehydration. He clutched a data slate in one hand, tapping feverishly to calculate dosage intervals for yet another incoming patient. "You are damaging yourself," said a voice from behind. Stephen turned to see a Virellan technician, shorter than Silex, with dark green veins swirling visibly through her translucent skin. She held a nutrient pack in her upper left hand. "I'll eat when I can," Stephen said, not slowing down. "You said that 6 hours ago." "I meant it then too." The technician's voice adjusted to a firmer frequency. "The metabolic rate of your kind collapses under prolonged exertion. That is not a theory." "I'm not collapsing," Stephen said, stopping only long enough to take the nutrient pack. "I'm triaging 12 patients. If I sit down, that number drops to 11. The technician studied him for a moment, then turned and walked back toward the lab. She said nothing else. Down the corridor, Silex stood before a wall-sized monitor, watching real-time overlays of infection spread across 3 decks. Stephen approached, still chewing. "How many new cases since the civilian transport docked?" 17, Silex replied. 10 are stable after your treatment. 3 are declining. 4 are not responding at all. Stephen exhaled through his teeth. "That's worse odds than I'd hoped. Your drug slows it, but it does not halt the neurological cascade in every subject. There is variance we do not understand." Stephen tapped the side of the screen, zooming in on a cluster of red highlighted vitals. "Are these the non-responders?" Silex nodded. "They share a common genome marker. One we have not encountered in the previous 72 cases. Could be a receptor pathway difference," Stephen muttered. "Or an immune system overreaction. You are guessing again." "I call it hypothesizing. Sounds smarter," Stephen said, then scratched his head through the helmet. "Can you get me a cell structure comparison between responders and non-responders, specifically focused on protein folding around the viral envelope?" That level of analysis requires 3 hours. "We are operating at 72% system lag due to emergency rerouting." "Then I'll run it myself," Stephen said. "You are not certified on Virellan biocomputing systems." "I'll figure it out." Silex's eyes narrowed. "Your determination is statistically irrational." "Irrational doesn't mean wrong." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then a shrill chime rang through the chamber. A female Virellan in a surgical coat burst through the corridor. "Code blue in Module 5, she barked, limbs coiled and tense. "Subject is seizing." Stephen sprinted. By the time he reached Module 5, the patient, a young Virellan adolescent, was thrashing beneath restraining bands. Her vitals spiked wildly across the display, oxygen levels plummeting. "Has the antiviral been administered?" Stephen asked, dropping to one knee at the console. 2 hours ago, replied the assistant. Initial response was favorable. This isn't the virus, Stephen muttered. This is secondary inflammation. He scanned the logs. She's reacting to the protein carrier. Her immune system's attacking the delivery molecule. You said it was inert. For humans, Stephen said, not for her. He grabbed a syringe from the emergency kit and filled it with a Virellan anti-inflammatory compound. He held it up. I'm guessing again. Do it, the assistant said. Stephen injected the compound into the Roman 4 port. Within minutes, the thrashing slowed. The vitals stabilized. The adolescent's breathing eased. The assistant stared at the monitor. You guessed correctly. Stephen sat back on the floor, legs splayed, arms limp at his sides. I don't like guessing. I just don't have time to wait for certainty. 2 hours later, the module logs showed a 93% stabilization rate among patients receiving the adjusted treatment. Even Silex had no words for that. Stephen, however, had just enough energy to make it back to the main lab before collapsing onto a bench. You require sleep, said a voice from above him. Stephen cracked one eye open. I'll sleep when the rate hits 100%. If you expire before that, your value diminishes to 0. Then I guess I'll try not to. Your behavior is not logical. That's the 3rd time someone's told me that today, Stephen said. You all keep saying that like it's a bad thing. He sat up slowly, groaning. I need to recalibrate the dosage protocol for anyone showing that genome marker. Can you flag those cases for me? Silex adjusted the interface. Already done. Stephen blinked at him. You just did something I didn't ask for. You are not the only one capable of adapting. Stephen smiled faintly. Careful, that sounded suspiciously like teamwork. More hours passed. The station's internal clock marked the end of the 2nd day since Stephen's arrival. The virus hadn't stopped, but it had stumbled. Fewer new cases, more patients breathing without assistance. The medical wing had transformed from a morgue into something almost hopeful. But then, as Stephen prepared to enter another module, the technician from earlier approached, holding a new datapad. There's been a report from the orbital outpost, she said. They've intercepted a transmission. Someone's been broadcasting data about the virus outside the system. Unauthorized, Stephen's jaw tensed. From this station, encrypted through the auxiliary relay, we've traced the signal signature to your landing craft. He stared at her. I haven't had time to send anything. Then someone else has. Silex appeared behind them. If another species learns of this strain before containment, they may attempt to replicate it, weaponize it. Stephen's voice was low. Who else had access to my ship? That is what we must find out. He turned away from the module door. The patient inside would have to wait. The virus wasn't the only thing spreading. 3 hours after the unauthorized transmission was discovered, the station's lower comms wing had been locked down. Environmental seals hissed shut, and sensor drones repositioned to monitor every entry point to Stephen's craft. The sleek Earth vessel looked oddly out of place among the organic, vine-veined walls of the Virellan docking ring like a scalpel tucked into a coral reef. Stephen stood just outside the access ramp, arms crossed, helmet clipped to his belt. His left hand trembled slightly, a leftover tremor from stimulant fatigue. Across from him, Silex reviewed the relay logs with a calculated stillness that made Stephen uneasy. You're sure the signal came from this ship? Stephen asked. The origin, frequency, and encryption pattern match your vessel's comm array, Silex said without looking up. But the content was not in your language. Stephen frowned. Then it wasn't me. The transmission carried viral genome segments, partial profiles. Enough to map a weaponized variant. Stephen stepped up the ramp and ducked into the cabin. It was no larger than a modest Earth bedroom-tight corridors, a collapsible console, and a medkit strapped beneath the main bench. He scanned the console logs. None of my systems logged an outbound ping. This was routed externally. Silex entered behind him. Then someone used your ship as a relay. That implies physical access. Stephen straightened. Only 2 people besides me have biometric clearance. Who? One is dead Commander Yeltok, the other is Chief Technician Ralnar. He helped me offload supplies when I docked. Silex paused. Ralnar was reassigned to Deck 6 2 days ago. He is not authorized near the comms ring. Steven turned back to the console. Unless someone gave him access or he took it. 20 minutes later, they reached Deck 6. The corridors here were quieter, lined with containment lockers and auxiliary power cells. Silex activated a wall panel, pulling up personnel tracking. "He's in cryo storage," Silex said. "Unusual, that's not his department." Steven adjusted his collar. "Then let's find out what he's doing in there." Cryo storage was a narrow chamber behind 3 bulkhead doors. Rows of upright stasis modules lined the room, each glowing faintly. Ralnar stood at the far end, facing one of the open units. He didn't turn when they entered. "Ralnar," Silex called, voice low, "step away from the interface." The technician turned slowly. His 4 arms were raised in a gesture of passive compliance, but his expression was unreadable. "You used my ship," Steven said. "Why?" Ralnar's voice was quiet. "Because no one was listening." Silex moved forward. "You compromised station security. You risked spreading the virus." "I was trying to stop it," Ralnar said. "Not here, out there. The virus didn't originate in Gornix. It was already in circulation before the commander arrived." "It's synthetic." Steven stepped beside Silex. "What are you talking about?" "There's a signature in the viral RNA. A splice pattern we don't use, not even for research. It's not Virellan. I found it when I was scanning your antiviral's interaction profile." "The virus was engineered by another species." Silex's eyes narrowed. "You should have reported this." "I tried," Ralnar said. "My messages were wiped from the core log. Someone on this station doesn't want it known." Steven felt a tightness in his chest. "So you sent the data off station?" "To a diplomatic relay vessel in orbit, one that can't be overridden. If someone's weaponizing this virus, we can't keep it a secret." Silex was silent for several seconds. Then he said, "Leave the cryo unit. You'll be confined until the council decides how to proceed." Ralnar didn't resist. As they escorted him to a holding chamber, Steven kept glancing at Silex. "You think he's telling the truth?" he asked. "I do not know," Silex said. "But the viral structure does contain anomalous sequences. We dismiss them as mutation drift." Steven rubbed his forehead. "So I walked into a biowarfare lab without knowing it." "You walked in and stabilized 47 patients," Silex said. "That is not irrelevant." 2 hours later, Steven returned to the medical wing. The adolescent he'd treated earlier was awake and sitting up, eating a nutrient gel with careful bites. The assistant on shift nodded as he entered. "She regained full respiratory function," the assistant said. "No neurological regression." Steven smiled faintly but didn't approach. Instead, he moved to the analytics station. A new set of data had populated while he was gone: gene expression models, response curves, and a cluster of patient logs showing mild complications. He tapped a few keys, overlaying the data. One pattern jumped out: patients with longer exposure before treatment showed more aggressive immune rebounds. Not from the virus, but from the antiviral itself, Steven muttered under his breath. "It's overcompensating." The assistant approached. "What is?" "The compound works, but too well in later stages. It tricks the immune system into thinking the threat is gone, so it drops its guard. But if there's any residual viral load..." The assistant's eyes widened. "Reinfection?" "No," Steven said. "Relapse. And maybe worse." He leaned over the console. "I need to tweak the formulation, lower the dosage over time. We'll need to taper instead of a single bolus." The assistant hesitated. "That will take longer to stabilize. We'll need constant monitoring." "Then we monitor every hour. We can't afford another wave." 4 hours later, the updated protocol was in place. The first trial patient received the staggered dosage. Her vitals stayed level, no sign of rebound. Encouraging, but not enough yet. Steven sat alone in the corner of the lab, his head resting against the wall. He hadn't eaten in almost 12 hours. When the door opened, he didn't look up. I brought nutrient broth, said Silex, placing a container beside him, and hydration supplements. Stephen blinked. Thanks. Silex remained standing. I reviewed Ralnar's findings. The splice markers appear in 36% of the viral samples, and only in the last 5 generations. So it's adapting from a synthetic core, or being guided. Stephen's face darkened. I need to know who built it. That is not our field. No, Stephen said. But if someone thinks they can engineer a perfect virus, they're going to find out how unpredictable we are. Silex tilted his head. You refer to your species, to anyone fighting to survive. Human Virellan doesn't matter. He stood slowly. This virus was made to spread. But it wasn't made to win. Silex didn't respond right away. When he did, his tone had changed. There is a council meeting in 12 hours. I will present your findings. Stephen nodded. Good, I'll prep the taper protocol data. You should rest. I will. Right after I check on the second wave patients. Silex watched him go, then looked down at the untouched nutrient broth. 12 hours later in the council chamber, the debate would begin. But for now, in the medical wing, Stephen moved from module to module, updating records, noting responses, adjusting doses. The virus was still here, but so was he. 17 hours after the council session began, the chamber floor had grown quiet, not from lack of debate, but exhaustion. The domed structure, carved from translucent silicate and laced with bioluminescent threads, thrummed softly as the final delegates filed out. Silex remained alone near the center dais, arms folded behind his back, chin slightly bowed. Stephen leaned against the outer railing, rubbing the heel of his palm into his temple. He hadn't slept, not really. The best he managed was a shallow drift during the 4th hour of testimony, his eyes open the entire time. They didn't vote, Stephen said, voice dry. They deferred, Silex replied. It is not the same. Feels like the same. They require consensus from all 5 orbital factions, Silex said. 2 abstained after questioning the origin data. 1 demanded a second viral sequence before confirming it was synthetic. Stephen pushed off the rail. They want a second opinion while people are still coding blue in their beds. There is a fear, Silex said, that if they accept your conclusion too quickly, they will be seen as having relied on an outsider. That they failed to see what you saw first. Stephen took a slow breath, then said, I'm not trying to make them look bad, I'm trying to stop people from dying. I know, Silex said, but some of them are not ready to admit that dying was ever avoidable. Stephen didn't respond. His jaw set, and he walked out of the chamber. 2 hours later, he was back in the medbay, hunched over a terminal with the taper protocol logs pulled up. The new dosage schedule had held steady across 5 cases. No relapses, no rebound inflammation. But now a 6th patient showed an anomaly. Elevated renal markers inconsistent with the previous 5. Why now? Stephen muttered. A Virellan nurse approached, her voice low. The 6th case was older. His filtration organs were partially synthetic. Stephen straightened. He had cybernetic implants, too, both from a mining accident last cycle. Stephen exhaled. The antiviral's metabolites must be pooling in the artificial tissue. The compound wasn't designed to interact with non-organic filtration. Should we suspend the protocol for him? No, Stephen said. Just add a chelation agent to bind the excess compound. I'll write the ratio. As he entered the dosage adjustment, the nurse hesitated. You should know, she said. Some in the lower decks have started refusing care. Stephen glanced up. Why? They say the virus is adapting again. That they heard the human drug won't hold anymore, he paused. That rumor's only half wrong, but if they refuse treatment they won't live long enough to find out. Would you speak to them? Stephen stared at the wall for a moment, then nodded. Where? Refinery deck, a group of 8. They've barricaded the access corridor and won't let medics in. 30 minutes later, Stephen stepped off the lift onto the refinery level. The air was heavier here from the heat exchangers and chemical scrubbers along the walls. The corridor ahead shimmered with a weak containment shield. Someone had tampered with the emitter. reducing its field strength just enough to pass through. He ducked under it and found the group huddled along one side of the corridor. 3 lay on portable mats. The rest sat against the walls, eyes alert. A younger Virellan stepped forward, arms tense. "You're the human," Stephen nodded. "Name's Jackson. I'm here to keep you alive." "We know what your drug does," the Virellan said, "and we know it stops working." "It hasn't stopped, it's adapting." "Like the virus, but if you refuse it, you're gambling with worse odds." "You didn't come from here. You don't know what we've seen," the younger one said. 3 of our coworkers died after treatment. One seized so hard he broke his own spine. Stephen's tone was calm. "Those were the first cases. Before we adjusted for immune rebound. We've updated the protocol. No one's died since. I've been in every module. I know exactly what happens when it goes wrong." One of the seated Virellans coughed wetly. The sound echoed in the narrow corridor. Stephen took a step forward. "I'm not asking you to trust me because I'm human. I'm asking because I've been in this 20 hours a day for 5 days, and I haven't left because I've seen this thing crack. Not vanish, but crack. That's not nothing." Another figure shifted. An older Virellan with one eye clouded and a scar down his throat spoke. "If we take your drug and die, it'll be because we let you convince us." Stephen crouched low, placing a vial on the floor. "And if you don't take it and you die, it'll be because you chose to. That's the difference. You make the choice, not the virus." He stood again and backed toward the lift. "I'll leave it here, you decide." As he walked away, he didn't look back. 6 hours later, the medbay logs showed 4 new entries from the refinery deck. All had received the tapered antiviral, all stable. No complications. Silex entered the medbay shortly after. His gait was slower than usual. "You were right," he said. "The Council has agreed to an emergency override. They will authorize system-wide deployment of the treatment." Stephen didn't smile. He just sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "They're late," he said. "They are not used to urgency," Silex replied. "They are used to certainty." Stephen glanced at the monitor. "Certainty's a luxury. Survival doesn't wait for it." Silex approached the screen. "There is another matter. The transmission Ralnar sent was intercepted by a vessel belonging to the Orvani Syndicate." Stephen turned. "You're sure?" The Council's Intelligence Corps confirmed it. "The Orvani have not responded to inquiries." Stephen paced slowly. "If they got the genetic data, they'll try to recreate it, weaponize it. That is the fear. You have border defenses, not strong enough if they mask their entry vector." Stephen's hands clenched. "Then we need to finish what we started, not just treat this thing, contain it." "Disarm it," Silex looked at him. "You have a plan," Stephen nodded once. "I can alter the antiviral. Add a strand that forces the virus into a mutational dead end. It'll still be infectious but harmless. If the Orvani try to use the code they have, it'll fold into junk protein." Silex considered this. "Like a trap. Like a firewall," Stephen said. "But we need to seed it into every known host before they can reverse engineer it. That will take time. So we start now." As the night cycle began, the medbay lights dimmed, but Stephen remained at his terminal. He began redesigning the compound's payload, stripping it down, rebuilding it, testing simulations. For every strain of the virus, he modeled a corresponding decay path. The lab's processors whirred around him, casting flickering patterns across his face. It would take dozens of iterations. It would likely fail more than it succeeded. But it wasn't impossible. And in this war between engineered death and stubborn life, impossible had already lost its edge. 9 hours after Stephen initiated the modified compound protocol, the station's internal temperature dropped by 4 degrees. Not due to any malfunction, but because the entire atmospheric system had been shifted to slow viral dispersion across the upper decks. It was a calculated move by Silex, one that thinned out personnel movement, but bought time Stephen needed. He stood at the central console in Lab 2, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands stained with a faint yellow from nutrient suspension medium. The last formulation had held in simulated tissue for less than 8 minutes before the virus adapted and began replication again. He leaned against the edge of the table, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the simulation logs. "You've been working for 23 hours, said a voice behind him. Stephen didn't turn. "That's probably why my legs feel like they're made of wet lumber." The technician, a Virellan named Lorvesh, moved beside him and placed a small container on the table. "You're shaking." "Only in the arms," Stephen said. "Brain still works." "Mostly?" Lorvesh tapped a key to bring up the failed sequence. "The decay chain collapsed at the 7th trigger site. You overcompensated for the folding rate." Stephen rubbed the back of his neck. "I was trying to stall the mutation at the hemagglutinin analog. It keeps pivoting there." "Then your sequence needs a buffer, something that doesn't trigger a fold but still draws the virus's attention." Stephen looked at her. "Like a false receptor," Lorvesh nodded. "We used that in foodborne pathogen trials 2 cycles ago, mimicry strands." "They don't bind, but they stall." Stephen's eyes lit up. "If we graft a mimic sequence to the compound's tail, the virus will spend cycles trying to bind to a ghost." "Exactly. Why didn't I think of that?" "You are not Virellan," she said simply. Stephen let out a tired laugh. "Fair enough." He began typing rapidly. Within 20 minutes, the new formulation was loaded into a microbatch printer. 2 test vials emerged, humming faintly as they cooled. Stephen handed one off to Lorvesh and moved to the containment simulator. "This one's either going to fizzle in seconds or run the table," he said. She placed the vial into the chamber. The simulation began. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. At 13 minutes, the virus stalled completely. No replication, no compensatory folding. Stephen leaned forward. "It's flatlining." Lorvesh tapped her screen. "Residual traces are dropping, no signs of reactive mutation." Stephen stood up and let out a long, slow breath. "That's the first time we've outpaced it." Lorvesh stared at the screen. "You just built a trap the virus can't escape." Stephen nodded. "Now we make enough of it to seed the system." 3 hours later, the compound was replicated in bulk. Silex joined them in the lab, his expression unreadable as he studied the results. "This will not cure the infected," he said. "No," Stephen replied. "But it'll neutralize the virus in asymptomatic carriers. It'll spread harmlessly, like a decoy. If the Orvani try to weaponize the strain they intercepted, it'll collapse at the same trigger site." Silex remained silent for a moment. "You are proposing we fight the virus with misinformation." "With misdirection," Stephen said. "It's biological sleight of hand. We're not stronger, just faster this round. Deploying this will affect the ecosystem in every deck." "Not if we use targeted dispersal," Stephen said. "Start with the water recyclers, then thermal vents. We keep it low-grade, low-volume, enough to seed the mimic but not overwhelm immune responses." Silex turned to Lorvesh. "Can your technicians manage distributed dispersal without alerting the orbital stations?" "They're already preparing the units," she said. "We'll have the first wave in place within 6 hours." Stephen moved toward the back of the lab, where the data logs from the previous week were archived. Column after column of patient outcomes, viral loads, compound responses. He scrolled until he found the earliest entry, the first Virellan he'd treated. He stared at the chart. He survived, barely, but he survived. Silex walked up beside him, and 49 others. Stephen didn't look away. "You said this virus couldn't be stopped, that it was beyond containment." "I said no Virellan could stop it," Silex replied. "I did not say no one could." Stephen turned slowly. "I didn't come here to prove anything." "I know," Silex said. "That is what made it effective." 4 hours later, the dispersal began. Small, translucent canisters were placed in vent shafts behind coolant panels inside water filtration units. Each one released a controlled mist of the mimic compound, invisible to the senses, undetectable to most scanners. By the 8th hour, viral replication rates dropped station-wide. Carriers still tested positive, but with strains that couldn't penetrate living cells. The mimic had taken hold. Stephen sat in the observation deck, looking down at the planet below. The atmosphere shimmered with soft auroras, a side effect of the station's defense grids cycling to low power. He sipped a bitter electrolyte solution, the only thing he could stomach without his hands shaking. Lorvesh joined him. The lower decks are reporting 0 new cases, Stephen nodded. Good. The Orvani vessel hasn't made contact, but we know they received the sequence. They'll try to build on it, Stephen said. They'll think they've stolen a weapon, it will fail. Eventually, Stephen said, but they'll still try. And next time they might not make the same mistake. Lorvesh leaned against the railing. Then what do? Stephen set the empty cup down. We keep building traps, we keep giving the virus something to chase that leads nowhere. You mean stay ahead? Exactly, she looked at him. What if they come here? Then we show them what happens when an unbeatable thing meets something inconveniently persistent. Lorvesh tilted her head. You really think that's enough? Stephen rubbed his eyes. It's never enough, but it's what I've got. She stood to leave. You should sleep. He didn't argue. Hours later, he lay in the quiet of the medical dormitory. The lights were dimmed. The air was dry and cool. He stared at the ceiling, eyes open, sleep just out of reach. Somewhere below, the mimic compound was still working. Still fooling the virus into chasing ghosts. And for now, that was enough. 2 days after the mimic compound reached full saturation across the station, the last patient in the medical wing was discharged. The once overflowing quarantine modules now stood empty, sterile, and quiet. The ambient hum of filtration systems no longer sounded like a countdown. Stephen Jackson sat alone at the end of a long diagnostics table, his eyes fixed on the floor while a small container of nutrient paste slowly warmed in his hands. Silex entered without announcement, the door sliding closed behind him with a soft hiss. You haven't left this wing in 36 hours. Stephen didn't look up, didn't feel like it. The wing is operational again, no new entries. No alerts from the orbital perimeter. Stephen turned the container in his hands. Anything from the Orvani? No movement. They appear to have lost interest. That's not good, Stephen said. They're not the type to back off unless they're waiting. They may have tried replicating the virus already. Then they're probably still trying to figure out why it's inert. Silex approached the console at the far end of the room and tapped a few commands. A sphere of data lit up, glowing pale gold. We've confirmed the mimic strain has displaced the original virus in all known carriers, even dormant reservoirs. Stephen finally looked over. That's faster than I expected. Your dispersal method was not subtle, Silex said. But it was effective. Stephen stood, stretching his neck until it popped. I need to shut my ship down. Some of the relay subsystems are still running, and I don't want anyone else using it as a backdoor. That has been handled, Silex said. We reprogrammed the biometric security to exclude all station personnel by default. Only you retain access. Stephen blinked. You did that without asking me. You had not slept, and you were muttering to a coffee dispenser for several minutes. Stephen sighed. Fair enough. Silex tilted his head. You should return to Earth. Stephen leaned against the console. I still need to debrief with your council. They've already filed the resolution. You were cleared of any procedural violations. Your compound has been archived, and your authorization tags have been preserved in the station's emergency protocol logs. Stephen didn't speak for a moment, then said, You're telling me I'm done. Silex nodded once. Stephen inhaled deeply, then exhaled through his nose. So that's it. We won. No, Silex said. We survived. Stephen chuckled, rubbing his temples. Right, forgot who I was talking to. That distinction matters. Stephen glanced at him. To you, maybe. To you as well, Silex said. You fought a weapon with a tool. And you did not elevate yourself above the infected. You worked beside them. Stephen tapped the edge of the console. I worked because no one else could. You worked because you refused not to. Stephen crossed the room and pulled a folded datapad from his satchel. I logged everything. Dosage curves, metabolic responses, cascade inhibitors. You'll need it if another strain shows up. Silex took the datapad. "We will not forget what you've done." "That's not the point," Stephen said. "The point is, you don't have to call Earth next time. You just have to act faster than last time." Silex placed the datapad in his coat pocket. "Understood." Stephen moved to the bench by the door where his pack sat half-zipped. He pulled the strap over his shoulder. "Lorvesh said she's staying on this station," Stephen said. "She requested a permanent reassignment, cited the need for cross-species medical research." Stephen raised an eyebrow. "She's clever." "She is." Stephen paused. "You going to miss me?" Silex blinked slowly. "You are loud. You interrupt protocols. You refuse to rest and you question authority without hesitation." Stephen smiled. "So, yes." Silex turned to the console. "You are statistically disruptive in the most productive way possible." Stephen laughed. "I'll take it." He headed for the exit but paused just before the door opened. "What happens now?" Silex didn't look away from the console. "Now we correct the records. We explain that the virus was not unbeatable, only unfamiliar, and we prepare for the next unfamiliar thing." Stephen nodded slowly. "And if the Orvani come back, we will not be unprepared again." Stephen stepped through the door and left the medical wing for the first time in 3 days. 3 hours later, he stood at the base of his ship's ramp, scanning the station one last time. The docking ring had returned to its gentle hum. No alarms, no sirens, no red pulses. The lights glowed a soft blue. Calm, Lorvesh approached, carrying a small case. "You left this in Lab 2, Stephen took it." "Thanks," she looked at him. "You're really leaving? There's nothing left for me to fix now?" "You're not curious." "I'm always curious," Stephen said, "but I'm also exhausted." She stepped closer. "The compound you designed, it's elegant. It doesn't feel like a human solution." Stephen slung the case over his shoulder. "That's because it wasn't just mine. You gave me the idea. Silex gave me the tools. Half the protocols were adjusted by your people. But it started with you." "It started with someone who refused to watch another body drop." Lorvesh nodded. "I hope your people know what they have in you." Stephen climbed the ramp, pausing halfway. "I think they do, sometimes." She raised a hand in farewell. He returned the gesture. The ship door sealed behind him with a quiet hiss. Engines cycled. Systems came online. Departure clearance blinked green. As the ship detached from the docking ring, the Virellan Research Station shrank against the backdrop of stars. Stephen set the autopilot and leaned back in the pilot's chair, arms folded behind his head. The virus was gone. Not erased, but defanged. The threat neutralized. The mimic strain would remain in circulation for months, maybe years, ensuring that no stray remnant found fertile ground to grow again. The Orvani had nothing useful, only a shell of a weapon that would fail the moment it was deployed. No follow-up would be needed. No second wave, no hidden reservoirs. The containment was total. The station would recover and the systems around it would remain unaffected, and Earth would never know what nearly happened. Stephen closed his eyes as the ship crossed into slip space. He didn't need accolades. He didn't need recognition. He just needed to rest. And for the first time in a long while, he finally could.